Real estate investing can bring big reward and big risks. So know your risks. Welcome to the Real Estate Risk Report, the show for real-world insight on real estate investment risk. Now, here's your host, Lance Pederson.
Thank you for joining the Real Estate Risk Report. I'm your host, as always, Lance Pederson. Thanks for joining us. So today I have a good friend of mine, Whitney Elkins-Hutten. She is with Goodegg Investments. How you doing, Whitney?
Doing great. Sun's shining. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, happy to have you. So Whitney is in lovely Boulder, Colorado, and we were just discussing her wonderful backyard sunroom situation that overlooks, loveliness that is Colorado. So happy to have her join us today. So before we kind of get into all the weeds and the details, Whitney, why don't you share a little bit with us about how you kind of got into this space and started investing, passively in these real estate deals and real estate syndication. And I think a lot of people will be able to relate with kind of your story and how you got started.
Yeah, so it's been a long road, but I actually started off in 2002, living, flipping, and house hacking. And honestly, it was entirely by accident. I bought a house with a significant other, and I wouldn't say did everything wrong, but certainly on how we purchased the house probably wasn't the most buttoned up ideal legal situation. But about a month later, the relationship fell through, and here I had a house. It was all under my name, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what do we do? So stuffed it full of roommates. It was in dire need of a rehab. I mean, every square inch of that place needed to be redone. And this is before YouTube videos, so I still had the book. I went to Home Depot and got the Home Depot 1, 2, 3 book and learned how to rehab a property myself and sold it. That was probably my mistake about 11 months later, but turned a $52,000 profit. And then at that point in time, I realized I hadn't been paying my mortgage the whole entire time. As a matter of fact, I'd been pocketing money. And that light bulb went off for me. And I'm like, how many more of these deals could I possibly do? And so really dove into that for the next few years, building up capital. Didn't really realize that what I needed was for my goals of financial independence and time freedom was to figure out how to replace my income through cash flow. And so that journey, took me about 10 years to finally realize how to get into rental real estate. And made that transition. And then once I figured out how to execute the same rehab strategies on a rental property, pull out my cash, rinse, repeat. Most people call that the BRRRR strategy now. I scaled up to a 30-unit portfolio, 51 units apartment complex pretty rapidly. And then my husband and I were doing about $3 million in flips just to kind of continue to replenish our capital. And then my husband wanted to step away from his job. So we're like, oh boy, I don't want to have 80 properties. So we transitioned into multifamily real estate. And, anytime you level up your game, you have to re-engineer your systems. So our same systems that we were using to rehab our single family properties and do our rehab or our flips on those properties, kind of broke down. So we had to re-engineer everything. That's when I transitioned more into syndication investing as an LP in order to understand just how the fundamentals work, maybe make some connections in the space with the intent to become a general partner at some point in time and run our own investments.
Yeah, no, that's quite the journey. So what was your job back in 2002? Like what was your career, your job?
Yeah, my
what
job.
did you do?
I loved my job. I actually was an epidemiologist for the CDC. I was working on a government contract, right after 9/11. So it was a bioterrorism facilitation contract. So my job was traveling all over, our Region 8. So Wyoming and Colorado, and training doctors how to administer smallpox vaccines, anthrax, medications and stuff like that, and then manage different radiological chemical responses in the hospitals. So,
Wow.
It was fun. I loved it. That's what I went to school for. But I also waking up every morning and having to sit in a 6 a.m. FBI meeting, seeing what you had to see there. I'm like, I'm okay not knowing that. I want to be an oblivious person if you're a normal American. So Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like, oh man, that's what's going on. That's a bummer, But I mean, it's a cool experience to have done that. And how long did it take? When were you able to sort of cut the cord? You said, so. I mean, you kind of, oh no, I've got this house, 2002, and then it was 10 years later, or when did you were able to finally say, okay, I've got enough built up. I don't need to do both of these things simultaneously. I can, kind of quit. Like, hey, this has been fun. See you later.
I stayed in my job probably well past when I needed to, because after being in public, like working for the CDC, I transitioned into community pharmacy, spent 11 years, working in more local public health responses through community pharmacy. And really, again, really was very passionate about that. Health is a huge topic for me, a problem that we need to solve globally. But I let my job drive my identity. And when we had our child, I think that's really where the struggle became real for me, is how do I balance these two together? The yearning to stay home and be with her, grow our portfolio, which I knew I knew my job was not going to get me to financial independence or time freedom, but, really concentrating on that portfolio. And it was a sliding scale for me. I think the entire journey, I left my full-time employment in 2018 and then stepped down from there to work more part-time and from home. And then never really stopped working. I transitioned into full-time real estate. So, but definitely the way that I've structured my life, allows me a lot more flexibility and to really concentrate, more time and effort on our investments.
Yeah, and it proves, I think that, with your story sort of demonstrates too, is just you created optionality, right, for yourself along the way. Mm-hmm. And there's something about that's that freedom. So, and I think that maybe sometimes people think they're more binary thinking. We have that we tend to do that, right? As Americans, sort of black and white, see this or that. But, it's sort of that you were free, even though you had a job. You enjoyed what you're doing. You were still free because you knew you had multiple, you had optionality. Mm-hmm. You had other sources of income. You could decide you were in control.
Yeah.
It didn't control you. I think that's super, super powerful.
Yeah, I would say there was actually a period of time in 2017 where I had scaled up to about 10 holdings. Certainly not enough, passively coming into, be able to step away. However, I was served a pink slip. And I actually knew that was coming. I had 8 months, had noticed that my job was going to be eliminated. And so, nobody, you wake up one day and you're like, I really thought I was going to make it a couple more months, in the, after the holiday season, they would let me go. We were going through an acquisition process with the company that I was working for. So, I was in training and development. That department rarely survives acquisitions. And so I knew that was coming. But nobody likes being, told, hey, here's your severance, 6 month severance, thanks so much for your 11 years of service. I was in tears for a couple hours, but then I was like, wait a second. I get to spend 2 months at home with my family during the holiday season where I had been traveling and working so hard for years. And I'm like, this is amazing. So really took time off. I did find another job pretty immediate after that, but was able to negotiate my start date to be after the first of the year. And they didn't like that at all. They were they wanted me on ASAP. And I'm like, no, January 8th sounds great.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that is what it's all about, right? Is that now you guys at Goodegg, you spend a lot of time preaching these principles, right? These things they take time, but they're not out of reach, right? And I think that, and I think it's a great point even for you. You were very active. You were balancing multiple things. You've been doing it for years. But when that, like you said, it's about identity. You as an employee of a job and that identity, you're crying because it's over. That means there's a transition taking place. Mm-hmm. But you had a plan. You had already been working the plan for years to put yourself in a position where you weren't crying for 3 days or whatever. Right? That's. And I think a lot of you, it's the mindset, right, where they get sort of stuck.
No,
and thinking that there's,
we packed the car
yeah,
and went camping that weekend. I was done.
Yeah. You're like, okay, man, all right, got it out of me. We're good to go. Like, but it does take time. So I think it's not impossible, but it takes time. It takes planning and it takes education. So like your journey was, yeah, I mean, you were active, like you house hacked, you had a house and you're executing the burr and, and it's a lot of moving parts. And I think a lot of people think that is maybe the only way. I've got to go buy a single family rental. I think that what you guys spend a lot of time preaching now is that you don't necessarily have to take that step. No, if you're super fascinated with doing that and swinging hammers and hiring subs and, knock yourself out, go buy Home Depot 1, 2, 3, watch a ton of YouTube videos if that floats your boat. But you don't have to do that, right? Like it's not, you can sort of skip straight to the step of becoming a limited partner. But I think maybe you can kind of speak to the fact that when people realize this, like, okay, I want to kind of do what Whitney did. Maybe I don't have, because I know you work and educate a lot of people who maybe have not yet met the criteria as an accredited investor, those sorts of things. So what kind of advice do you provide to those people? Knowing you yourself that the journey does take some time. So there's no instant, it's not just instant on. But how do you, you tell them all the exciting things you're doing, which is great for you to say because you're an accredited investor and you get access to these things. But how do you deal with that conversation with others that you're coaching or consulting with or, in the industry? Yeah.
I mean, I think, even if you're investing in the stock market, I mean, how people make their wealth with any investment is the x-axis, it's time. And so, if you're starting out as early as possible to save as much as you can, really, and reduce your living expenses. And I don't like, seeing people cut it down the quick and, reduce their vitality of life and not be able to live now and experience it, but really doing what you can to kind of cut the fat as much as possible. Because the quicker that you can save that nest egg and start investing, and I'm partial to real estate, but be it in especially value add equity plays, that is the quicker you can launch and get started. So I love helping people understand, if you can save up the initial $50,000 beyond having your financial moat in place, enough to cover 3 to 6 months of expenses, and initially. So you could weather any personal storms that happen, let's figure out a way to go start buying those single family, small, 1 to 4 units, take advantage of the lending environment as it is right now, historically low interest rates, getting a cash flow property and then, rehab that property, push the value on it, and then refinance out as much as the capital as you possibly can. Certainly not required. I mean, you can do a turnkey and leave the capital in, but if you can pull capital out through a value add process, now you're building your wealth, your asset base with the same bucket of money over and over and over again. So when people see me, initially when I got, 30 properties, it's not that I had the down payment for every single one of the properties. I mean, probably rough numbers, I had, down payment for 15 of those, maybe, if I left all my money in, but there was the fact that I was able to recycle my capital and create value in another way. And I think that's also, you can also create value in your job. You can create value in a side hustle or a business. It's really learning how to create value and get it in exchange for that value and then leverage that value and move it up into a larger asset. That's where the real wealth creation is. And I think that's, teaching that mindset or helping, sophisticated investors understand that mindset to move them from wherever they are currently now to get across that accredited threshold. Now, there are operators out there that will work with a sophisticated investor. However, they're a little bit harder to find because they can't advertise. So you have to then get, shift if you don't want to build your own asset base, but rather find the operators. Now you have to be a master at networker, putting yourself in, meetups, conferences, listening to podcasts to find those operators, and then learning how to vet those operators. And that goes whether you're a sophisticated investor or accredited investor. But I'll just kind of like pause there because we can go down a huge rabbit hole there.
Yeah, we can. But no, and I love how you put it, right? So it's that first you have to look inside yourself, right? And you say, what do I have, and what can I bring, and what am I willing to do? There's going to be some sacrifice that has to be made. And then, there's a mindset, right? Then that's usually what it requires. You've got to be committed to it. You have the mindset to get through what will be hard. But you need a plan, right? You need to pick a lane and an avenue, right? So you either follow a path like you have, Whitney, or like you said, if you're good at networking or whatever. I think that's the piece that everyone wants to believe, because it's fun to have multifamily syndications, and it's like, it's fun to say, it's passive income. It is. It's great. I mean, obviously, you and I love it. We spent a lot of time talking about it. It is great. Or syndications in general, or funds, or whatever it is. But this isn't an armchair deal. I mean, even when we call it passive, it's not all that passive. It's passive in as much as you're not, like I said, hiring subs and swinging hammers and things like that. But it does require a commitment to educating yourself, and then ultimately of developing relationships. And I think that's the part that I've seen is sort of in this real estate crowdfunding version 1.0, is that it sort of had this promise of you just sit at home and just push buttons and invest in these deals or whatever. I mean, it kind of ends up being like that, but in the broader spectrum, it does require you to develop relationships. Definitely. Education and building relationships with people, because as you said, especially if you're not accredited, but I think it goes, like, to your point, it goes both ways. Just because you're accredited doesn't mean that you can sit there and just push buttons and invest in things online. I mean, you can do that, but I'm going to go on a limb and say you might be investing in things that probably aren't generating the best risk-adjusted returns. And I'm not trying to make a sweeping indictment of every crowdfunded deal. It's just to say, I think there's more out there. I think there's more opportunity that you don't see or have access to. But either way, it's just realizing that you are an investor. It's your money. It's your financial future. It's taking it into your own hands. And it's going to require education, building relationships, networking with people, getting out there, being vulnerable. If you're not doing those things, you won't get the real benefit of the reward. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and part of it is, I think, being a little bit humble you don't know what you don't know when you start getting into this arena. And I've seen that kind of, nip a lot of investors in the rear. So especially if you talk about getting into a passive investment, a common mistake I see from people scaling from their own single family, small multi-assets, getting into a limited partner situation, is that they're so driven to look at the numbers on the deal. Like, I want the best return, right? When you ask that, I just had a conversation yesterday with an investor, and it's a pretty standard conversation I have. I'm like, what's most important to you in investment? And she said the numbers. And I always pull it back. I'm like, that's great. And let's talk about the operator, because the operator is the business plan, right? And so, but I see investors that just, it's so easy when you have these crowdfunding platforms to continue just to shift that focus on the deal and the numbers and the return, but not really fully understand who the operator is and what is their capacity, what is their track record, what is their history, what is their capacity to kind of ebb and flow with the interest rate environment that we're in? I mean, like, are they using lending correctly? What was their track record during COVID? How did they respond, to, potential, vacancy risk at their properties? Like, did they take a lemon and make lemonade? Did they stick their head in the sand? So just those type of things. And I really help investors orient back to, like, if you want to have control, right, then you need to understand who the operating team is and really know, love, and trust them, and understand the underlying fundamental asset you're investing in. Like, a limited partner is exactly that. They're a limited partner. I see the second risk that I see is investors come in thinking that they're debt on the property. They're a limited partner. They're partnered in the equity. So you can even tell by some of the terminology that is used. They'll be like, when do I get my dividend check? Not a dividend. We are, you don't get an interest. You don't get a 1099. You get a K1 from a 1065. So you're on the equity side of the deal. We make money together. We lose money together. Hopefully don't lose money, but, So just
that, I mean, and that's, yeah, you're right. Like, cause it goes back to the number thing, right? Because the offering memorandum said, 17.6 percent IRR, and I think in this are little things. I mean, this is how I see it, is that anytime a number, we've been trained this in school, it's like it has a decimal point that goes out, to the hundredth place, to me that says precision,
yeah,
which means that must be what it's going to be, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's a range.
But it's not. It actually should be. It should actually be rounding up to or rounding down to the nearest, tenth, right? Like it's 17 becomes 10%. I mean, these are guesses,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not that it's not important. It's sort of a starting point. And I know that we go on to that. And then I think the other one is sort of that preferred return rate. I mean, you and I've had this discussion, right? It's that's a lot of people, that's what they confuse it as, sort of, well, this is guaranteed to me. And it's like, no, it really means that if this project is able to generate profit and distributions are made of said profit, you will receive it first, right? Mm-hmm. Up to this amount, right? It's like, that's different than interest. Is like you said, I borrow you money. You are contractually obligated to pay me that interest rate. If you don't, you're in default. And, and hopefully
I get to foreclose.
If it's secured, I can go after.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's right. I can foreclose on you. Right. So those are very, very different things, but it's a starting point. And I think mm-hmm. that's where it goes back to, if you focus more on becoming a good investor, just in general, and then specifically real estate investor, it's about understanding what are the risks, right? I mean, if it says 17, I mean, to me, when I see, and I think you're the same, right? Like if I see a 17 IRR and a 2 equity multiple or whatever on a deal, I'm saying, all right, well, their strategy must involve some decent amount of risk, mm-hmm. right? Like there's some crazy stuff going on here. This isn't like a just buy it and do nothing sort of investment. This is like a buy it and do a bunch of crazy stuff and to generate a return. I mean, it has to be, mm-hmm. right? Like there's no such thing. It's like the higher the number, the more risk there more than likely is. Mm-hmm. And that's just how it works. And so understanding that that's just a signal, right, to you as the investor that says, if it says 8% and that's it, then you have to evaluate and start with assuming that there must be less risk involved. If it's 6% or 5%, same thing. Now, and then you go and look at what is the plan. And sometimes people are offering investments at 7% that have risk that's equivalent to something that's 15.
Yep.
That's the job of the investor, is to tell the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's just the shiny object and the numbers. It's sort of moving off of that, using it as a starting point and starting to ask the questions like you said. It is. These are deals that are being, especially if they have, high teen sort of returns, it means that someone has to execute some plan where there's going to be moving parts, also known as friction, also known as change, also known as risk, right? And so figuring out, like, are these people that are doing this, are they capable of actually making that happen?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the question, right? Like, can these guys pull this off is really what you're asking yourself. Mm-hmm. Could they do this? Can they make this happen? And asking all sorts of questions that will get you to some answer that says, are they capable of doing this or not? You talk to you in 2012 and say, are you capable of buying a home and renovating it and renting it? Well, the answer was, of course you were. In 2002, you already told us what it was. It was like, oh no, I own a home. What am I going to do? You know what I mean? Were you really capable at that moment in time of doing it? No, you weren't. But you learned.
Forcing right? function is like what we call that.
The forcing function, exactly. So it's. I think for me, right, it's like that's the big thing. Is just we have to slow it down. Like what are we really looking at? And this is what it is. It's sort of the. But what needs to happen to generate the value, and who's going to do that, and how are they going to do it, and does that sound believable, right? And so for you guys, it's a great example. Like, what are the things, I know you've done a lot of multifamily stuff, as you said, right? You really made that transition to multifamily. And I think it's a great place to start after single family, because we all can relate, right, to renting an apartment, right? And they're everywhere. Yeah. We drive by them all the time. But I know that you guys have, you in particular have started to expand and looking at mobile home park opportunities and self-storage opportunities. And those are they're different. So maybe you can share with us a bit, like how you've made that, because that evolution of single family, obviously, like you said, you had to recalibrate your processes to then multi, And then as what are the things you use to carry over to these other property types as you kind of move in these other areas?
Yeah, definitely. So, the real punch for me, in that transition from single family to multifamily was the scalability. Like, how do we scale in an efficient and effective way? And and it's also about knowing your strengths and your opportunities as an investor. My strength is I knew numbers. I could analyze data, about a market, about a deal. I have done hiring and firing. I knew how to interview operators. I felt very comfortable with that. I just didn't have the time to do that, run my own investment. Yeah. And so, making that, limited partner step and then taking the general partner step with Goodegg, that was just kind of an evolution in and of itself. But, it's tangible. It's a roof over your head. I mean, you're just like, oh, well, instead of having one single family on a plot of land, now I've got 30 units or 150 or 250 units all stacked up on top of each other on one plot of land. And so it's not as easy as that. I mean, you still have, additional inherent risks that come along with, multifamily. One of the larger risks is tenant risk. Like if you get a bad apple or several bad apples in a complex and you're not paying attention, that can really bring down the community. And that's something that we really focus on with our multifamily assets is elevating the community, through the cosmetic rehab, through the amenities that we offer, through our screening process, adjusting rents. I mean, even part of it, adjusting rents closer to market rents naturally kind of weeds out, a tenant base that you may not want to have on a B class or an A class property. Now, as far as the transition into, and we can dive down as deep as we want to on the multifamily underwriting, piece, but as far as, why making that transition, on and bringing in self-storage and mobile home park deals, well, investors want diversification. And when we talk about diversification, it's, how can you get access to uncorrelated asset classes within real estate? And so self-storage and mobile home parks don't move like multifamily does. They have a different, business plan and risk profile. And so diversifying that is really helpful to your portfolio. Mobile home parks tend to take a very slow, smooth ride, very nice and steady, multifamily and self-storage kind of bounce around like this, only because of the nature of how the tenant base turns over. In self-storage, leases can turn over monthly, multifamily, they can turn over annually. And so they complement each other. So it's helping investors create a more well-rounded portfolio, reducing their single asset risk exposure, spreading it out over multiple assets, multiple markets, multiple deals, multiple operators, right? And so that's really what we're striving to do within Goodegg Investments is, beginning to offer these other asset classes. I mean, we've already done 2 self-storage. We've already done a mobile home park deal. I mean, these aren't new to us, but bringing these back in and really building out those other asset classes so people can come to us and get access to multiple strategies and really build a portfolio with us.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's just it. Like those are the progressions you make, and you really get an understanding of multifamily, which is a great place to start. I mean, even if you skip the single family game, it's easier to deal with, and the beauty of those three in particular, when we put them next to each other, is that the ways that they complement is that they're all three cash flowing. Mm-hmm. They all are generally cash flowing asset types, so they go together well. And then a lot of times they complement each other. Self-storage and apartment dwellers don't have storage, they use storage, so it's like you get sort of that same that life cycle of people. They're sort of complementary in that regard. And and I think having that exposure across all of them creates that diversity. And we've seen with self-storage, I mean, self-storage and mobile home parks are becoming more institutionalized as well. So, I mean, unlike multi's already gone there, like it's that happened a long time ago. And now we're seeing, which, I think for many listening, maybe it seems odd to even say this, but it wasn't that long ago that mobile home parks were sort of I mean, and maybe some people are like still thinking that. So this one's hard. You know, you're in a transition when you talk about things you think everyone's already made up their mind on, that they're kind of the darling if you're in the industry, mobile home parks and self-storage as well. But both of those used to not be the case.
Yeah,
They actually used to be like, mobile home parks, you're freaking kidding me, out of your mind?
they still have a
And
stigma
a lot of that
to
was
them.
driven because, yeah, they still have a stigma. And it's understandable. They are a different animal. They're harder, I think, to manage than in my opinion, in multifamily. Even a C class or B, they're different. There's different mechanics, but you know, before institutional investors thumb their nose at it. So the exits. So that's the other important thing to look at. Is just what are your exits? Like, who's going to buy this thing? I mean, the beauty of you take a B class or a B minus multifamily and you sort of get it to be a B plus or whatever. There's an institutional buyers will go out there. When you stabilize it, it's more of a core asset. They'll buy that from you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially you renovate the units and you bring it up, whatever. You've got more exit strategy. Of course, other value add people or other sort of smaller investors will buy it too. But mobile home parks used to be like, if you're going to sell it to someone, you have to find someone else like you to sell it to. And now it's cool because now it's like, if you can go in and stabilize and convert most of the homes to be, you know, tenant owned homes instead of park owned homes, and, you know, you stabilize the asset, institutional investors are willing to buy that stuff.
Yeah.
And when they're willing to buy it, you know, you can move those cap rates down, and it's, you know, it's a beautiful thing. And self-storage, same way. It's becoming, in fact, the bigger units are becoming more like, it's, what do they call it? There's a word for it on the tip of my tongue, but it's like airline tickets and hotels. You can walk into a self-storage place and they can tell you it's $26 a month for this unit. You come back at 5 in the afternoon and they're like, it's $93. It's like, what?
Yeah.
What happened? Well, but you know, supply and demand is what happened.
Definitely.
You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's, you know, the technology that's being brought into real estate. We see it with the multifamily rents. We see it with, you know, less or so with the mobile home park rents, but definitely self-storage. I mean, we can adjust based on supply, demand, and seasonality to really capture, you know, that income spread. But yeah, I mean, I think one other thing, you know, that really helps drive on self-storage is, you know, operators who can, you know, put a brand on their units. And as they start acquiring more units, they have a uniform brand across multiple units within a market, across markets. And now that's a more attractive portfolio for some of these larger, you know, institutions like BlackRock or somebody like that to pick up. I mean, you know, heck, who wouldn't want to, you know, who's sitting with a REIT or a hedge fund or something like that, pick up like 5,000 units all branded the same. It's like, I've heard one of my favorite operators that I like to work with, he puts it like Disneyland, like everything you have this, it's Disneyland experience across all the parks, right? Or across all the self-storage facilities. You know what you're getting. Right. And so does the customer.
You do. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. It's the economies of scale for one, because it is self-storage it's as much a small business as anything. And like any small, like it's the guy who, the founder of Subway, right? Like they were losing money with the one location. He's like, we need to open 9 more. Right. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, because he knew it. His economies of scale. He can't afford just to operate one Subway. Mm-hmm. He needs 10 of them because, you know, and it's the same with self-storage. I mean, once you have the infrastructure, right. And a lot of these now, especially with self-storage, I mean, the technology is crazy. You don't, you know, even the labor and the resources at the facility itself are, I mean,
you can automate them.
People are doing it without any of them. You don't even need them anymore. Right. So it really is. And that goes back to that. You've got to vet the operator, right? Like it's not the deal on its own. It's like, what is their strategy? And when you talk to, you know, an operator like that, who's like, dude, we look at it like, this is Disneyland. We want a uniform, consistent experience, whether you're Disneyland, Disney World, you're Disneyland, Tokyo, wherever the hell you are, you feel the same way. And you do that, that brand has its own enterprise value. And the beauty of self-storage is when they sell that, you're going to get a piece of it. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's also a little bit different because the real estate is more closely tied to the real estate than in some of these others, like think of like a hotel or something, or like, there's just other these like senior living or things like that, where the real estate is more of it's a huge component of it, but the operating business still, it's sort of, there's some separation, right? In terms of like, where's the value being accrued to and associated to. And it's been nice. And I think that you and I have spent a lot of times talking about how you take one person's thing and the power of that diversification, right? Is that it does become, having exposure in the diversity of geography, sponsor, operator, property types, having it spread out does create what amounts to a net new investment product, which for many passive investors, once again, it's easier to make one allocation where you get that built-in diversity than trying to make 12 different investments, right?
Exactly.
Which once again requires a lot more. If you want to be more passive and go on more vacations, and I think that's important, is that you can become a professional passive investor. The amount of time you have to spend actually, right, like babysitting, all 15 of your individual investments. I know one guy, he's a former dentist, retired dentist in Michigan. He cracks me up because he got into all this and he just became he started investing in everything. And now I got like 45 investments and I can't, I'm going like, I thought you retired, man. Like, this is how you want to live your life. Like, it sounds to me like you're working harder now than when you did as a dentist. Are you sure you did it right? And he, just kidding, but right. Some people, they don't realize that there's a lot of effort, right, to do that too.
Well, I think that's kind of like the evolution of the scale, right? Kind of like, just like as a person's own personal life cycle. This is a life cycle of the investor, right? I'm living that life cycle right now. I've reduced, sold off part of my single family portfolio, playing Monopoly, scaling it up into, single family, selling it up into multifamily, trading it up. And, like your investor that you're speaking of, blink and we've got, just under like 30, investments that I'm working on and managing. And I'm like, okay, great. Maybe I'll just, write a larger check into a fund next time and get, and I still have access that capital allocated over another 15 to 20 projects. Right. But now it's less about the deal. It's more about the operator and what is their business plan. So, I think every time you level up your investing, you're not releasing control. Because you still have there's still an immense amount of control that you have, but you are, it becomes more and more apparent and more important that you have vetted the operator, that you understand fundamentally what the business plan is. Again, like what you said earlier in the conversation, their track record in the past doesn't indicate, future performance, but really picking apart that track record. And because it will indicate how they're able to respond to future environments. So, but yeah, it's just, I think the natural evolution of a passive investor. Eventually you're going to, hit upon an investor that is just like, nope, I'm okay. I don't want to track down, 30, 40, 50 and, syndicated investments every month. I just want to, have all those funds invested into one fund that is making that allocation across multiple assets. Even the K1s, managing all those K1s, 45 K1s, woo!
It is. Yeah. And it's a lot, man. And and that's one thing I think a lot of investors first get into it. They sort of don't realize that that's one of the decisions you're making, whether you realize or not. You're probably going to be you're going to be filing an extension to keep yourself sane. And I know, many people out there want to believe they can, get in, but it's just that sort of, it drives me crazy. We're obviously at Verivest trying to do our part to figure out how to help sponsors and operators more efficiently produce the tax returns, right? So that the K1s can get to investors. But, across the board, it is a bit onerous. And those are the things that, we always make it sound all glamorous, but there's things like this that you sort of have to get your mind wrapped around. There's some more complexity, but trust me, the tax benefits inside of those K1s are amazing and powerful and probably better than you even appreciate, on their face.
Oh,
right.
absolutely.
And I think that's when you get into it, is just really realizing how powerful those benefits are with real estate investing. And it's part of the process, which is why I love what you guys do at Goodegg, because that's all part of it, right? Like, it's just helping people step through these things, right? And understand and and really internalize what these things mean and how they impact and affect you and your wealth, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's not just the monetary wealth, but also, how can you leverage a team to help you achieve your goal? And so that's our mission, vision, values at, Goodegg Investments, is how do we help families, parents, mothers, even more specifically. I mean, women are in charge of over 90% of the household wealth. Like, how can we help empower them to, understand and invest in these powerful real estate assets to generate cash flow and a balanced approach to appreciation? Appreciation's icing on the cake, but how do you add that back in as a wealth pillar? Combine that with capital preservation and tax benefits to accelerate your wealth build. So you can go back and do what it is that you really want to do in life. Maybe it's spend time home with the kids, travel the world, start a nonprofit. I don't know. I mean, that's different for everybody. But it comes back to leverage, right? That's the ultimate, return of value, I feel, on, syndicated and fund investments, is you're leveraging a expert team's knowledge, time, hustle, ability to get credit, lending, utilize or raise other investors' capital so you can access these larger deals. And for most investors, that's greater leverage than they could ever get on their own. But it also leverages your time. So yeah, you have to do the tax returns. You got to figure out where your investments are. I really encourage investors to read the updates so they are fully informed on their investment. But, I can tell you right now, I've got, two of my single family properties that are in rehab, in between tenants. And I probably have spent more time managing those two rehabs in the past 6 weeks than I have on all of my portfolio investments to pull together. So it is definitely a leveraged investment.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And what I found too is a lot of people, they enjoy it. That's why it's sort of this hobbyist thing. And that's, going back to my buddy, the dentist, right? He's like, yeah, but I enjoy this. It's fun. Right.
That's great.
I like the relationships, and so, and it does make sense. I mean, of course, for me, I feel the same way. Of course, it should be fun. How you can make money and enjoy what you're doing, like at the same time, passively, without having to, that effort is no big deal. Then you just put it down and go play golf or go, like you said, on vacation or whatever it is that floats your boat.
Oh, definitely.
That's, you're not tied down.
Yeah. Just think about it. Like the storm that hit Texas back in February. Yeah. If you were managing your own apartment complex, you were in the weeds, back in February with all the, issues going on with power and water and stuff like that. But, when you invest passively and you have a team that can mitigate that, and, handle that situation, they have their team in place, you check in on it, maybe ask a couple questions, you go about with your Valentine's dinner, so.
You got it. Yeah, it's good stuff. Cool. Well, as always, it's great catching up. I love our conversations. And where can people learn more about what you guys are doing at Goodegg, and what's the best place to kind of sync up with you and the team over at Goodegg?
Yeah, definitely. So you can check us out at goodegginvestments.com. If you would like to join our Goodegg Investor Club, it's goodegginvestments.com/invest. And yeah, we're super excited. We've got several, deals in the fire going this summer. We are, about to open up our self-storage mobile home park fund here in the next couple weeks. So we've got a lot of things happening. So, and you can reach out to me directly at Whitney at goodegginvestments.com.
Awesome. Yeah. And they are Verivest Sponsor Network members.
Absolutely. Find us on Verivest.
That's exactly right. Find them on Verivest. Cool. Thanks so much, Whitney. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Lance. Thank you for having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye.